Today we're going to look at the best movement legends in Apex Legends, but not only for their specific movement abilities, but legends who can use their entire kit to enhance or outplay their opponents with their movement. This means ways to better survive or do some creative playmaking that is outside of the box. As with every list I do, this is just my opinion and my thoughts on my 4,000 to 5,000 hours of play, and really every character in Apex can be viable as it depends on you, the player. For the first time ever, we are kicking it off with the best legends, which I deem to be those in God tier. I have a couple legends in this upper tier of virtually broken, and the first is Horizon. Even after all those nerfs season after season, Horizon is still arguably the best legend, if not a top 2 to 3 legend in the game. But for movement, it all comes down to her tactical and passive combo that gives her an almost slippery feel that makes her much harder to get down. Flying up in the lift to make an aggressive black hole play or high ground capture are a couple ways to use this when attacking, but equally, I find her survivability to escape and reset just as viable. Drop the lift, pop a battery, all while getting no fall fatigue when hitting the ground is so important to slide around the corner and take less damage. Any legend who has a passive that manipulates movement like this means it's always on and it's always going to be helping them out. At the same tier as Horizon, I also put the OG movement legend Pathfinder in here. Path is not as meta as Horizon, but for purely movement properties, Pathfinder's movement is much less linear and it makes him way less predictable, which is critical. Not knowing where a path is grappling from and having no indication, like say a Horizon's lift, means Path can swing around really anywhere and is not locked into one area. Path also gets the added benefit where his ultimate is solid to rotate the team around, in the horizontal at least, that Horizon really doesn't have as she is purely vertical. The biggest drawback right now is that Path is a massive refrigerator and pretty easy to beam, which is also kind of understandable as his movement is just so good. There's a few legends that are in S tier which are the best of the best, but slightly under these top 2 God tier legends. The first being Apex's most free legend when it does come to movement, and this is Valkyrie. Long gone are the days of air superiority, but Valkyrie is still so good as all of her abilities can enhance her movements. The literal flying with her passive, I mean, do I really need to say more? Then she does have her ultimate ability to also greatly move the team around to get fights or avoid them and gain positioning. The evac tower does kind of hurt her a bit, but when looking at her, the legend, she's still great. And while her tactical is not specifically a movement ability, the ability to send it onto enemies to get a little push or escape while they are distracted, I think is a little bit underrated. I already said it, I'll say it again. Passive movement. Any legend with a passive ability that enhances their movement is just so OP, and Bangalore does fall nicely into this. This is double time, which is busted when it does come to crossing areas a little bit quicker and escaping much faster, but also she does have her smokes and her ultimate rolling thunder to greater help her team's movements. You can either smoke yourself to cross open areas or smoke enemies to blind their vision. Either way, it is enhancing your movement. And likewise, a rolling thunder placement is a very viable way to move through open areas and force enemies to move or hide momentarily. All of Bangalore's abilities enhance movements of herself and or the team, and she is a legend you should look at if you are looking to be a little bit more mobile. Many do not consider her a movement legend, which I think is understandable, but another legend who frankly is just a top tier for her overall ability to scout around and reset fights is Wraith. Not only is she insane at her survivability and traversing open areas, her portal is one of the best in-game positional tools, and it again enhances the speed of her character and can be very crucial for the team to use. I don't think Wraith is as top tier and meta as she once used to be, but when it comes to her ability to purely move around, she's pretty awesome. I do think her overall size also makes her much harder to hit in a one-on-one, and a Wraith player who has solid movement can really enhance their playmaking because of her size. There are a ton of legends in that borderline insane of top tier at A+, and we do start with Apex's most carefree legend, Octane. Yes, the meme of Octane stimming or running away is a real thing, but this just better reinforces how solid Octane's movement actually is. The most in-your-face ability for Octane is the stim, which is just a raw way of increasing your movement at the cost of some health. While this video is not a how-to-play guide, the stim I do think can be more of a throw at times if the player using him is not skilled to know when to not stim. Second to the stim is of course his pad, which is just a quick 90-second recast of getting yourself and the team a fast rotation or the ability to make a play. And while Octane's passive is not a movement ability, the passive health regen is actually going to help Octane move because you don't have the heal as often, and thus you can move around a little bit more. Vantage is another A+ legend who is pretty great for movement, but is maybe a little bit more limited than say Octane is. Unlike Octane though, Vantage can more regularly mix together both horizontal and vertical movement. Vantage's tactical is of course how this is all done, and it has a very generous cooldown, which is also pretty nice when you do want movement. I do think Vantage has a little non-typical movement through her ultimate sniper, as she can force enemies to back off or move, and then she can move up with her tactical bat. In the same vein as Vantage, there is going to be Loba. Loba's bracelet does mix some very unique movement in Apex, where she can be mobile, but also completely concealed as her bracelet is sent out. The bracelet does lack a little bit of verticality, so I do think it's more or less meant to go from building to building or cover to cover. I do think there's a lack of utility or control when you do send it out as well. You're pretty much just in Fate's hands when it is going out. Catalyst is really the first legend on my list where she does not have any actual movement abilities, but it is her abilities that are actually busted when it does come to her overall movement. First is the most obvious, where her wall is great for traversal through the open areas or to block off and angle things in buildings to let you maneuver around. Second is that if you are in and around buildings or certain or more closed off areas, the ability to barricade doors and then reposition is actually nuts, and this type of movement can be very powerful. I am simply just not rating her higher because, again, she has no specific movement in her kit, but as always, it is what the specific player makes of it. We now move down a half tier to a solid A, and we do start with Ashe. She's definitely locked into her ultimate when it does come to movement, which is unfortunate, but that phase breach is so strong for quick escapes or aggressive pushes, which does give her an A position on my list. I also think the passive of finding death boxes or pinging death boxes isn't necessarily movement, but it can absolutely influence matches and help you move or rotate to get a fight or avoid it, which is maybe a little bit underrated, but at the end of it, I think it's more of just a convenience tool if you do have good game sense. The Hound is in the same vein as Ashe, where their ultimate is the only movement tool in their kit, but it is absolutely crazy for combat, and it does give the Hound an edge really over anyone in a one-on-one and anyone who is looking to escape. The strafing speed Bloodhound gets is incredible, and it both makes them harder to hit, plus makes them more lethal. Bloodhound also gets a very minimal amount of atypical movement in their passive, like Ashe, where they can track enemies, and this again can influence movement, but really it's not a factor in the long game or in combat. We are in a trend right now, and Ballistic also sneaks into the A tier due to his ultimate ability. Ballistic may be the best when it does come to pure speed in their ultimate, because the speed is really just one part of it, as it's the faster reloads, ammo, and other weapon handling perks that are also a big deal for Ballistic. Unlike Ashe and Bloodhound though, Ballistic does not have any other movement perks in his passive, but really I don't think you'd want any three of these legends if you are looking for the best movement experience. Rounding out the A tier is Mad Maggie. Mags is probably the weaker of the three now four legends we just discussed because of a few things, but it doesn't mean she's bad, as really the movement she can get via her speed nodes can be incredible to make a push or escape. Also, her tactical drill can kind of force enemies to move, and then it enhances her push plays, which is not really what you think of movement, but it absolutely influences play. As for that passive, I think the passive shotgun speed is kind of forgettable, as any other legend can just put their guns down to achieve the same speed as shotguns as a whole, and shotguns are just not really the meta these days. In B tier, we have a few legends which do have some okay or decent movement properties, or are a little bit situational. The first of the bunch is Revenant at B+. Revenant would actually be higher when it does come to movement for me if his passive of higher climbing wasn't so positionally dependent. Mainly, you really need to be around either taller climbable terrain or around tall buildings to make use of this, and if you aren't, then there's not much to it. Because of this, I'll add the disclaimer that I give Revenant the D tier if he is in the open, and A tier if he is in and around buildings. For movement, of course. Newcastle squeaks in a small amount of movement with his tactical and ultimate abilities, and I do give him the straight B rating. The ultimate is actually nuts if you are utilizing a teammate to jump to, as the distance you can go of 70 meters is pretty crazy. Otherwise, both the vertical and horizontal distance is fair and nothing really special. As for the tactical, you do have a little bit of protection when moving or walking with the shield, which is nice, and I actually think if they buffed the speed on the shield just a little bit so you could walk faster or walk and sprint, he would be even more insane than he already is. The counterpart to Newcastle is going to be Gibraltar. Gibby has some atypical movement like Bangalore by throwing his ultimate to force movement or create cover, but I would say it's the old reliable tactical dome shield, which can be great to make moments of relief when crossing open areas, or of course being super aggro by doming on the enemy team. Overall, Gibby and the thick boys are just not going to be what you think of when it does come to movement. For C tier, we have just a few legends, and this mostly revolves around those who can use only atypical types of movement through their kits to enhance their play. The first is Fuse at C+. Fuse is honestly one of the more underrated legends when it does come to their ability to move around, mainly because all of their abilities are so good at creating pressure. While this of course forces enemies to move, it also also gives a lot of opportunity all game long to let him and the squad maneuver around. The main ticket will be the tactical clusters, but any fuse who has the discipline to gradually use their grenades over time can really non-stop apply pressure by bouncing between grenade, tactical, ultimate type of rotation. The next two plain C tier legends are more or less going to be the legends who function the same in terms of movement. This is both Rampart and Watson. Rampart and Watson just don't have any movements in their kit, which is understandable as they are defensive legends. However, both of these legends can be pretty great in and around buildings when they do place either fences or walls down in proper locations. You can really outmaneuver, escape, and make plays from alternate angles through the use of these abilities. But other than this, they just simply don't have movement in the traditional sense, unless you want to call placing a Rampart wall down and climbing on it to get slightly higher climbing movement, then sure. In D tier, we have legends with pretty much no movement properties. The first at D+, meaning they can sometimes get a glimpse of movement, is going to be Mirage. This is just the act of sending out Mirage clones or using Mirage's ultimate when running away. You get that brief moment of invisibility and some obvious confusion towards enemies' sightlines, which can help you maneuver around or make a push, but in reality, that's kind of it, and it is pretty minimal. Second, this is Seer at D tier. Again, Seer has no movement in his kit, but he can ever so slightly better move through his ultimate and or tactical by seeing where enemies are, stunning and slowing them, and then moving up to make a play. Otherwise, there just is not much there for Seer. We are now getting down to the bottom of the barrel, and we do have Lifeline at F+ tier. Straight up, there's nothing here. The only thing is every 3 or so minutes, you can throw down a care package to get a little bit of cover as you do cross open areas. Second to this is Caustic. Caustic is kind of like Watson, Rampart, or Catalyst, as he can use the gas to help move around in buildings, but really, I just find it isn't as good as Rampart or Watson, and I think the only thing Caustic does have to help him move around is going to be the gas grenade. I do put him on the bottom because he is also a thick boy, which is just hurting his movement potential even more. And if I had to put one legend in the dumpster fire tier where their kit can actually hurt their movement, well, it's going to be one of my mains, Crypto. Crypto has one of the only kits where I can think of where you have to actually exit the game, stop moving, and go play Nintendo Switch while everyone else moves around you. Let me know who your favorite movement legend is in the comments, hit that like button, and check out this video for more Happy Gaming Legends.